Welcome to r/malicious compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter but not the spirit of a request. And today's first story is, Don't Tell Me My Dog Is Fat. It was many years ago now that I was a locum veterinarian in a small suburban veterinary clinic. For the most part, the clients were a pleasure to work with, were receptive to the advice and instructions given to them by the staff in regards to their pets, and it generally made my time working there a placid experience. Every rare once in a while, though, a client's account would be flagged as non-compliant. This usually meant a client who didn't follow medication instructions, post-operative procedures, scheduled rechecks, general health advice, and so forth, usually resulting in cases not progressing as well as they should have. Of course, some of these clients would also complain about said poor outcome, and the fault was of course never theirs. Enter one particular Miss Non-Com. Since I was only a part-time locum, working every other weekend at the time at this particular clinic, I seldom saw a client more than once, unless they specifically requested to see me again. As such, I had never met Miss Non-Com before, but plastered at the top of her file was the dreaded non-compliant. Miss Non-Com owned a Jack Russell Terrier that had an extensive history with the clinic, and as I browsed the history of the patient prior to the consultation to familiarize myself with them, it was painfully obvious that Jack was far too fat to be healthy. In fact, there was enough of Jack to make another Jack, with some Jack to spare. Jack was due his annual vaccination and checkup, and so I asked them to enter the consultation room, which they did at a leisurely pace due to the fact that Jack was barely able to keep up with Miss Non-Com, who was herself not particularly fast due to her own bodily dimensions. It was somewhat apparent why Jack was struggling with weight issues when his own owner was apparently having the same difficulties. Typically, in a situation like this, I would be as careful as could be not to offend the owner or make any assumptions about their current bodily state, as it's common for large owners to likewise have large pets, and suggestions have to be made appropriately without blatantly putting too much blame on the owner. However, my desire to be tactful went straight out the window when Miss Non-Com, with a sour expression on her face, which also appeared to have the remnants of a candy bar smeared on one cheek, heaved her panting Jack onto the table and greeted me with an irritable, "Jack needs his needles, and don't tell me my dog is fat." Very well. Jack was only 5 years old, far too young to be the size he was, though no pet of any age should ever be as fat as he was, and his history had revealed a host of maladies that resulted from his size. Abrasive skin damage of his chest and belly from dragging on the ground, skin-fold dermatitis, recurrent yeast infections of his ear canals that were squeezed shut by a neck that was no longer a neck, but merely a globular extension of his thorax, degenerative joint disease, upper airway disease, the list went on. Now, unfortunately, one shortcoming of the clinic I worked at was the senior veterinarian there, who owned the practice, was a very senior fellow indeed, who had long lost his passion for the job and seemed to be content to just let things slide with the more difficult clients, treating the patients symptomatically rather than addressing the underlying problem. I decided that now was the time to assert my new blood. I have a habit that as I gather the history of the patient from the last time they were seen, I dictate it to myself as I type it into the history of the file. This gives the client a chance to correct anything I may have misheard or add something they remember as I repeat it. And thus I did with Jack, complying with Miss Non-Com's desire that I do not tell her that her dog was fat. The patient at presentation of the consultation is morbidly obese and at weigh-in is half a kilo heavier than at last consultation, presenting with moderate to severe dyspnea, likely complicated by excess adipose tissue deposition in and around the thorax. I looked up from my typing. How much are you feeding Jack these days? Miss Non-Com shot me a poisonous look, but perhaps because she hadn't met me before and thought perhaps I hadn't quite heard her entering remark, responded, "He's getting 2 meals a day, what you recommended last time I was here. Should all be in your records there." It certainly was. The amount recommended should have been fine to encourage weight loss, even in the face of limited exercise. So I forged on with my history writing. Patient is consuming recommended diet, but has failed to shed any excess body mass since last seen 5 months ago. Another sideways glance from Miss Non-Com, and this time her cheeks flushed a little. I proceeded with the physical exam of the patient, and with each problem I noted as a result of his being overweight, I used a different synonym. Hefty, rotund, enlarged, bloated, and a variety of other fat but not fat words were used as I typed up the findings. And in my peripheral vision I could see Miss Non-Com's complexion slowly turn from pink to tomato to beetroot. It was when I reached the point of Jack carrying a lot of weight to the opera that she exploded. "How dare you! I told you not to tell me he's fat. There's nothing I can do about it, so stop telling me." I mustered my most pained look I could manage. "But ma'am, I never once used the word you explicitly told me not to use. And as for there being nothing that can be done, the history states you've refused testing to determine if he has thyroid, adrenal, or other disease that may be complicating his weight loss. This really isn't in his best interests. If money is an issue, we do have payment plans that can help spread out the cost of such testing. I didn't get to finish, as Miss Noncom scooped Jack off the table, berating me and the entire staff of the clinic as she rumbled her person out of the clinic as fast as she could, and swearing that my boss would hear about this. No sooner had the door shut, I heard the nursing staff burst out giggling, and my boss poked his head out of the adjoining consult room, where I'm sure he heard the entire exchange. He simply sighed, shrugged, and said, "Well, I didn't hear you say the word fat once," before closing the door. I later learned that Miss Noncom had returned the following week when I was not present, and not only had Jack vaccinated after complaining to my boss, but also conceded to having blood work done, which revealed an underactive thyroid. Jack was subsequently started on thyroid supplementation, and by the following year was a much healthier and appropriate weight. The second story is coworkers not doing their part, boss caught in the middle. This was some years ago when I worked for a small restaurant. I started out as a dishwasher and eventually moved to cook/prep cook. Ended up working there for a couple of years. There came a point where during the busy summer months, as a dishwasher still, I would be busting my butt to make sure everything ran as smooth as possible throughout the restaurant. I'd help the servers with their tables. I'd of course clear tables as much as possible. I'd help the kitchen staff restock things as needed, and so on. The dishes of course were the job, but only so far as we could stretch things before closing time, after which the remaining dishes and any other things that needed doing throughout the restaurant would get taken care of. Sometimes this took some time to complete when the restaurant was super busy and things backed up really bad throughout the place. The thing is though, that while there are customers, serving the customers' food to them is the priority. So when push comes to shove, the thing that falls behind the most is always the dishes, my job. This led to a string of days, more than a week, where I was stuck in the restaurant an hour or more after close, just getting all the dishes clean for the next day. One day was particularly bad, when I was there until 1 a.m., several hours after close. This was partly because it had been a really busy day, but also some customers staying late, and so on. My boss told me the next day, "I've noticed you've been closing later and later, and yesterday you closed way past midnight. What's the deal? I need you to close faster." I explained to her how the dishwashing took second place to the priority of serving people food, so the kitchen staff always got my help when they needed it, and the serving staff always got my help when they needed it too. However, at the end of the night when the last customer left, the servers would finish resetting the tables, and the kitchen staff would finish restocking things for the next morning. And naturally, the cleaning that needed doing all around would happen. But then everyone else left, and I was stuck there washing dishes on my own, with nobody helping me. Well, that's your job. You should be able to handle it. Yes, but I help them do their jobs, so at the end of the day when they're finished, they should help me with mine, or else I'm going to be here longer, and that's just how it is. Alright, well, I need you to leave earlier, so figure it out. I did figure it out. The next day, as my manager liked to call it, we were slamma-jamma, crazy busy. Dishes were even more backed up than ever before. At closing time, I told the serving staff and kitchen staff that I needed some help cleaning this up because the manager wanted me out of there earlier. They said, "Well, you can manage," and off they went. I decided I'd had enough. I left about 45 minutes worth of dishes uncleaned and took off at the appropriate time I was supposed to be done by. The next morning, the kitchen staff were quite upset because they obviously didn't have things all finished and had to do some extra work to get it clean. My manager called me into the office to have a talk when I arrived later that day. "So you left early and left a bunch of stuff dirty in the dish pit. Is this going to be a problem?" "You told me to leave on time. I did the best I could. The options were stay later or leave on time and leave some dirty dishes behind for the morning staff to clean." "You can't get those dishes done in that much time?" "The dishwasher has a limited capacity, so that's the limit for some dishes. But pots and pans, the things the kitchen uses mostly, can be hand-washed more easily. The same is true for some of the serving staff stuff. In fact, a lot of that has to be hand-washed regardless. Here's what happens. First, the front end gets slammed. Then the kitchen gets slammed, making the orders for all those customers. Then the customers leave and the serving staff do their thing, and the kitchen starts to catch up. Then the kitchen gets caught up and the serving staff starts heading home. Then the kitchen staff heads home, and it's just me and back still dealing with the original big slam of customers we had earlier in the day. Here's what I can do. I can refuse to help them and 100% focus on making sure dishes are done. That may mean you need to have more serving staff come in to handle the load, since I won't be helping. That also might mean you may need to have the line cooks and/or prep cooks stay longer to make sure the kitchen is kept up to pace through the busiest hours. If I'm just sticking to clearing tables and washing dishes, I can keep up and maintain everything fine. Okay, we'll do that. The rest of the restaurant didn't last a day before they were demanding my help during their rush times, clearly upset, and it was only a day after that the manager instructed them they needed to help me with washing dishes, and we'd all leave together at the end of the night. They finally started to understand when they tried to help me get those dishes done. It changed everything. I, of course, returned the favor, and all was well. Not long after that, I moved over to handling prep work, slicing and dicing and all that kind of thing. I also started handling food deliveries and so on. It was nice, and I got paid more, but I found out pretty quick that the faster I did my job, the less I got paid. Unlike with dishes, there was a bit more fixed amount of work to do, so I was happy to help the dishwashers. I got so fast at one point that in the middle of the summer rush days, I just hang out in the dish pit, and the dishwasher would have it so easy. The manager tried to have me do both dishwashing and prep work, because otherwise I lost too many hours. But that situation and how I got past it is another non-malicious compliance story. And the last story is, they fired me before I finished my day. I'm a nurse. I work in nursing homes, rehabs, old folks' homes, etc. I do the paperwork that is sent to Medicare. That paperwork has to be submitted in a timely manner, or the facility goes from $700 a day to $200 a day. Just tossing numbers out. Don't remember the amount. This is important in a second. I worked for a facility that I loved. The people were wonderful. It was like a huge family. The staff ate their meals with patience, the independent people visited often, and our bosses were easy to approach. Then the bosses retired, at the same time. Our board then decided that maybe we would make more money if we hired a management company. All of these changes happened within weeks of each other. They hired a traveling nurse to head up the skilled nursing unit for a year. We didn't react well to her. She never smiled. She would just look at you if you asked a question, and she decided that new rules that didn't apply to her were needed. Shortly after her hiring, she began firing everybody. It was like a war zone had erupted on the floor. Nobody smiled, no laughter, no visitors, no family meals, and loads of stress. I was the last one fired. Oh, I had been written up. 0 write-ups when she walked in, for things like cell phone on the floor, my pocket, drink on my desk in my office, water, and filling a certificate form late. Doctor signed it the day it was due, but they photocopied it before I had left for the doctor's office, so they had their 3 write-ups. At 1500 on Friday, the administrator calls me into his office. I'm informed that I've been terminated. I'm floored. I work my A off. I'm actually great at my job. I've been there several years. I'm escorted to my office to gather my stuff. They've turned off my computer, asked for my passwords, and escorted me from the building. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. They called me in to fire me just as I was creating the packet to send to Medicare. I was never able to send it. They never asked if things were situated since it was Friday. I volunteered no information. Remember that timely manner? Well, that Friday was the very last day to submit about 30 different forms. Most were 14-day assessments that literally covered 14 days. Billing, friend called and let me know that the default cost over $100,000 by the time they figured everything out. Edit. The passwords they needed were system admin. I ran 2 different systems for the campus. They couldn't access either without the password. As for my other passwords, heck no, which includes the filing one, which created a longer delay. Thank you for watching. Bye.